goal in bringing you here today is part of an ongoing project where we create safe spaces for people to share their thoughts about difficult issues or interesting issues, and everyone should feel free to share their views as long as it's within this context of sharing and listening to other people. And today what we're going to be talking about is women in STEM. So STEM is science, math, engineering, technology. I went out of order there. And throughout the years, it's been difficult, especially in these fields, for women to get the recognition and to get the support that they deserve. And we asked some of these wonderful women to join us today and share their experiences in these fields. And we're really grateful that you all took time out of your busy schedules to share with us some of your thoughts. And I'm going to introduce our moderator, and then she will introduce the rest of the panelists, and we'll get to hear who they are and what they're working on and what they think about the position of women in their fields. So Eva Fernandez is the Assistant Vice Provost at Queens College. And now you're going to get a nice long list of all of the other things that she's doing. She's the Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, Associate Professor in the Linguistics and Communication Disorders Department, Doctoral Faculty in Linguistics, Hispanic and Luso-Brazilian Literatures and Languages, Speech, Language, Hearing at the CUNY Graduate Center. At Queens College, she supports and advocates for faculty use of instructional technology and supervises experiential education programs. And her research, on top of all of that, focuses on cross-linguistic language processing in monolingual and bilingual populations. She has additional research interests in technology and higher education and measures of student successes. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, and I will hand it off to you.
It's a pleasure to be here. I wonder, is the mic on? Yes, excellent. And I apologize. I belong to a bunch of departments with really long names, so it's really not that exciting. Thank you, Batya. As Batya noted, my research is on bilingualism. I'm a psycholinguist, so I really feel terrible being in a panel on STEM because I'm not really in any of those STEM fields that you guys listed before. In my first year as a graduate student, I realized when it was like very late in the semester, like November or December, that all of the classes I was taking were with men, and that it kind of shocked me when I realized that. And it's interesting how my life as a graduate student in linguistics kind of changed. I picked a committee that was all women. Now, since I've been working with graduate students, I've been on the dissertations of 19 students. I've chaired 3, and of all of those, it's only been 1 man. I teach classes that are predominantly women, so like in a class of 60, maybe 2 men. So I guess my field then is perhaps the kind of field that attracts women, very different than maybe some of the STEM fields. So I just wanted to start by giving you a little bit of that experience for me. Now, I do want to take a little bit of time from the panel to be shameless and promote a project that I'm working on. So Batya told you that I do faculty development at Queens College and some projects that have to do with student success. One of the projects I'm involved with is sponsored by the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and it's funded by the Helmsley Charitable Trust. And the project is to bring, to use teaching to increase diversity and access and equity in STEM education. The focus of the project at Queens College is access to computer science by women and by students from underrepresented ethnic groups. And my collaborator in that project, did he just step? Oh, he disappeared. It's Chris Vickery, who's sitting over there. He's a professor in computer science, and he's also the director of general education. Chris is redesigning a general education course that's called Information and Intelligence. It's regularly offered as part of the FYI program, which many of you might have been students in. And it's really too early to tell how this course redesign is impacting students, but if you invite us back next year, we'll tell you whether we manage to convince more women to get into computer science as a major. Now, also related to this project, and again, this is more shameless advertising of the stuff we're doing, we're beginning to be involved with a group called Girls Who Code, which sends people out to high schools to teach girls in underserved schools to learn coding skills. And we're going to be recruiting students from Queens College who have coding skills to become tutors. So if you're interested, talk to Chris, talk to me, make sure we get your name. Now, that organization, Girls Who Code, I was looking at their website yesterday, and they exist, they say, because they're interested in closing the gender gap in the technology and engineering sectors. And what gender gap is that? Well, so women make up about half of the US workforce, but about 25% of the jobs in technical or computing fields are held by women. If you have a room of 25 engineers, only 3 are going to be women. All of 12% of all computer science graduates are women. And in fact, at Queens College, it is no different than that. Chris and I have been looking at some data for how ethnicity and gender pans out in the different majors at Queens College. And if you look at all of Queens College undergraduates, 56% are women. Queens College undergraduates in the Division of Math and Natural Sciences, 58% are women. Computer science minors, 21%. And computer science majors, 14%. Maybe it's that computer science is not attractive for women. However, in 1984, when I was an undergraduate, something like 38% of computer science majors were women. So something is oddly going on. I don't want to say, I think I've said too much to sort of, well, yeah. I think let's move on to introducing the panel and to getting to the exciting questions that we've got for you. But I wanted to set the stage by saying there's some interesting gender imbalances that maybe we want to think about, and to what extent do we want to address them? How do we address them as individuals? How do we address them as an institution? So that's something that I'd like us to all be thinking about. Let us start. I suppose we may as well start with Shoshana, who's right next to me. And what I'd like, I mean, rather than me introduce you, why don't you describe the work that you're doing and how you got to your current path. So Shoshana is a third-year neuroscience student at Queens College. Mm-hmm. Take it away.
Hey, so this, oh yeah, the mic is on. So yes, as you just said, I'm a third-year neuroscience here at Queens College. I work with Huntington's disease, and I'm studying the way it affects transgenic mice, which is very exciting. No, sorry, transgenic rats, which is possibly one of the first. We are one of the first labs ever to use rats instead of mice to study Huntington's disease, which is a little more exciting than it sounds. Basically, rats have bigger brains. The disease is able to progress more slowly, which makes it better to, which makes it more easy to kind of like transfer that data onto people. So we're not, wait, sorry.
They don't literally transfer the data to people. It's theoretically.
Exactly. None of this is literal. But basically, instead of studying mice, we're studying rats. So the information travels slower. So instead of like studying, I don't know, a mouse dying after 3 weeks, we're studying rats that will die after maybe like a year, which is exciting. It's fascinating. Research like this has never been done even like 10 or 15 years ago. So that's the research I'm doing. In terms of classes and outreach, I am the president and founder of the Queens College Neuroscience Club, which I recently started with a few of my colleagues in the major after we noticed that not only is the neuroscience major underrepresented and hard to access, but a lot of people just don't know what it's about. They hear the word brain science and they're like, that sounds really scary and unapproachable. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it more accessible for everyone. We're trying to make it enjoyable. We're trying to make it fun, interactive. And this is actually a moment for me to plug something that I'm doing. next week is Brain Awareness Week. We're having 2 events, and about consciousness in the human brain and about autism, which is very like hot button topic right now. So if anybody here is interested, feel free to see either myself afterwards or Gabby, who's standing right there. Other than that, I'm also working on a project that we like to call QUIN, which is the Neuroscience Outreach Program for high schoolers. So we're trying to get high schoolers as interested in brain research as undergraduates here are. So we're starting like a mentorship program, linking up high schoolers with students who work in labs so they can literally follow the research in real time and get to publish results with them. It's very exciting. Projects like this have already gained popularity in New York City, so we're trying to bring it here to Queens. Other than that, I work in the Museum of Natural History a few times a week as technically an intern. And the thing I really like to do there is talk to kids about brains. Teach little kids, sometimes as young as like 4 or 5, how brains work, why they're important as a part of everything we do. So that's everything I'm involved with. And I guess,
that's a lot. Did you tell us how you got interested in brains and rat brains in particular?
And all that.
How did you get there?
How did I get there? Well, this is the story that I actually told Batya when she first spoke to me. When I was a kid, I'm still a kid, but when I was a lot younger, my older brother liked to do card tricks, and he would always try to kind of pull one up on me and try to trick me and all that stuff. So one day I just said, aha, here's what I'm gonna do. I got a book on card tricks and I read through all of them and I'm like, oh my God, this is how magic works. This is so exciting. And I remember feeling so enthused and excited about learning the inner mechanisms of something that seemed so unreachable. Cut back to my sophomore year. I'm a psychology major. I like studying it. It's very interesting. The case studies are amazing and impossible to grasp. But I remember thinking, there has to be some sort of mechanism for this. There has to be some sort of a way it works, similar to the card tricks that I learned when I was younger. So by happenstance, I happened to be taking an introductory neuroscience class. And I remember one of the first classes, what they did is that they posted a big MRI picture of the brain on the projector. And I thought, wow, this is crazy. The fact that our emotions, our motor control, such discrete functions are actually divvied up in the brain. That gave reason to all of these studies that I've studied in high school. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. So I began to read books, I began to take more classes, and similar to the way that I learned how magic works when I was a kid, I learned how the brain works now, which, if you ask me, is a kind of magic in and of itself. And the whole rat brain thing, I just kind of fell onto that in happenstance. It turns out the lab that I work in right now is run by a woman, and she saw how excited I was about research and how much I really wanted to learn more and to get my hands kind of dirty in it. So she decided, you know what, let's take you on and see how you do. And it turns out I did pretty well. So that's
pretty awesome. Thank you so much, Shoshana.
Yeah.
Next person on the panel is my close collaborator, Nathalia Holtzman. She's associate professor in the biology department. Why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and how you got here?
All right, so I will start by just saying where I am now and then kind of walk you through my biography, recognizing, of course, that my autobiography doesn't necessarily reflect on all of your life experiences, but it'll give you a sense of who I am. So right now, I'm, as indicated, a professor in the biology department, and that means I play a number of roles, as most professors here do. I teach a number of classes. I have historically taught things like Bio 105, the dreaded intro for majors. We're working on changing that, so it's not quite so dreaded, but give me another year. And I've taught cell biology, which a lot of the pre-med students take because it's covered in the MCAT. I've taught some courses for the PhD program in biochemistry at the Graduate Center. And I also have taught for the Macaulay Honors Seminar 3, Science Technology in New York City. I work with the Center for Teaching and Learning because I want to fix how horrible Bio 105 is, and to do that, I need to understand. What the difficulties are with the class. I can tell you that the department has thought long and hard about the class and really feels that the material that needs to be covered is what's in that class. So the question is, are there ways we can teach it in a way that is more engaging and more effective in your learning? And so you can move on past that and still think biology is great. So I have that front, and then of course as a faculty member I am on a whole host of committees on campus, and then as a researcher I also serve the community. So for example, next week I'll be going to the National Science Foundation to help decide where your tax dollars are going to go in terms of research funding. So sort of from anything to conferences, et cetera. Now, the research that I work on specifically is heart development. So I'm really interested in how the three-dimensional structure of an organ forms. And that means I have projects that look at things like the development of pediatric heart disease and coming up with some drugs to help prevent the progression of that disease in children. And we also have some projects looking at the environmental impact of various toxins on development. So for example, PCBs in the Hudson River, how do those impact development of an organism? And our lab has demonstrated, along with some others, that it definitely impacts heart development, but it also looks like they cause diabetes. And so we're looking at those biological processes as well. So how did I get here? My father is a scientist. We grew up in a household where science was just dinner table conversation, a little to the extreme. We used to carry microscopes on our camping trips. And you could often find like cow's eyes that needed dissection in our refrigerator. My mom had a separate fruit drawer just for weird things my father brought home. He also taught us from a very young age not to be intimidated by really anything. So I was born in the Netherlands. By the time I was 3, I had traveled around the world 3 times. And so I had lived in Japan, in Italy, and in Greece. And then my mom said, okay, enough. Let's find a home for these children so they can go to school. And that ultimately meant that we moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina until I was 10. And then we moved to Toronto, where I did both my high school and the majority of my undergraduate degree. So part of my uniqueness is that I was raised with science around me and with this sense that anyone could do this, and that we should all just be exploring and evaluating everything around us all of the time. And then the Toronto education system is really great. The public school system had a really strong science base, so the equivalent of grade 12, I had chemistry, physics, biology, and 2 math classes, and that was sort of typical. So by the time you got to your undergraduate degree, I did not attend a liberal arts college. I attended what I now recognize as a research institution, and so my entire undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto, which is the largest undergraduate institution in North America. So it has 80,000 undergrads. There are over 32 different biology majors and over 300 tenured biology faculty. So I have 3 non-science classes from my undergraduate degree. They are English, Boolean logic is my philosophy class, and computer science. That's my non-science core classes. So again, my educational experience is very different. I have 4 classes in developmental biology. I have a class in invertebrate regeneration. I have a class in quantum mechanics. I have a class in 2 classes in biochemistry, and so on. So courses, just a really incredibly detailed science education. And that was by choice. I decided when I was 9 that I wanted to be a biology professor and study fish. Which I do, but that's somewhat coincidental because I really study morphogenesis. It just happens to be in a fish. And then I did my PhD at the University of Oregon, which was where zebrafish research was founded, with a male faculty member who was probably, if I'd had my eyes open, the first case of gender bias. All of the women graduate students he thought were going to go off and be teachers. And he treated like his daughters. And his postdoctoral research fellows, which is what follows your PhD generally, he engaged with very differently. The projects that he gave us were very different, whether we were men or women. But I was just happy to be in a lab and a happy little scientist and didn't recognize that as a potential gender-based issue. And then I went on to a postdoctoral research fellowship at the NYU Medical Center with a female mentor, Debbie Yellen. And then moved from there to here. The biology department when I started was 50% women faculty, 50% men. That has changed. We have lost a number of the women faculty, and the new hires have all been men. So the distribution is now male biased. And I'm going to, for the interest of time, pass it on. So
to Sara Camnasio, right, who is our third panelist, a person who's studying physics, astronomy, and dance, which is an excellent combination.
Thank you.
Tell us how you got here.
Oh, thank you. Well, I just realized I'm the youngest in the panel. I'm actually a junior at Hunter College. And I'm studying officially physics as a major, but I'm minoring in dance as well, and I do my research in astrophysics, and actually work at the Museum of Natural History as well. I just remember they told me about it. And I work in the astrophysics department studying low-mass stars called brown dwarfs. And so going back to my biography, I guess, I was actually born in Italy, and I grew up I lived there until I was 16, so that's 5 years ago. And I moved here in what would have been my junior year in high school, but I decided to get pushed back because I didn't really know English. And I hated my accent to the point where you can barely hear it now because I would literally stand in front of the mirror obsessively trying to get rid of it. Now I miss it. Yeah, no, it sucks. So then I've never actually, when I was in Italy, I was actually studying classical languages. I went to a lyceum, that's what they call them there, like fancy high schools, that they taught me ancient Greek and Latin, and then I did have a physics sort of focus, but it wasn't a science school officially. So I never really was interested in science until I came to the United States, and I went to a small high school, and I had actually a really good mentor who was my physics teacher, and we only had calculus AB as far as like hard math and science. We didn't have any AP classes in physics or chemistry or biology, but he really found these 3 or 4 of my peers that we really enjoyed physics. We had a physics club. We used to build giant, well, I guess it's not that much physics, but blowguns and like giant planes, paper planes we would throw around. But we did actually do some science experiments. And so he would put us in the back of existing classes, and we would teach ourselves like AP Calculus BC and AP Physics. And then he finally took us to Columbia University, who actually, they have an astronomy outreach program every other Friday, and they let you use their telescopes afterwards. And this was in my junior year. And I completely, like the first time I looked through a telescope, I saw Saturn with my own eyes. And Saturn is like 750 million miles away. And I just thought, I can see that through this little thing with my own eyes. Like I thought it was just so mind-blowing. And I decided I wanted to be an astronomer. And so I applied actually to aerospace programs and physics programs. Physics is usually the way to go for astronomy. And I couldn't afford any of the private schools as an international student, so I ended up going to Hunter with a Macaulay program, which is a full ride. And I studied physics, and I met an astronomer the first time I went to Hunter who just happened to be there. She's not usually in office. And I told her, I love astronomy. I would love to get involved with whatever you're researching in. And she took me on to the Museum of Natural History, and I've been doing research for 3 years now. Yeah.
It's fantastic. I hope that you all appreciate the interesting similarities and like the playful approach that led you to your fields. I really love that. But also, we're all very impressed. This is great. So, could we turn the conversation maybe to talk about some of the challenges that you've all experienced? And we can share this mic, Shoshana. I'm hogging the mic.
No worries.
So, have you faced any particular challenges in your career? And would you say that in your particular field, there are different opportunities for men and women? Nathalia, you already mentioned some, but maybe you have other ideas. But who wants to? Shoshana?
Should I go first?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so are there different? So the question is, are there different experiences for men and women in, let's say, neuroscience, which is what I'm studying? In my experience, this is me personally, because neuroscience is such a new field, it really only rose to prominence in the 1980s or 90s when MRIs became more widely used. So in my experience, because it's new, women seem to be jumping on stuff just as often as men are. So everything's great, there's women all around. In my lab, for example, there's a lot more women than men. But again, fields like psychology or teaching, anything like that, I feel like you are going to find more men than women because you're not, how do I put it? You're dealing with people. Women, in my experience, are more social. They enjoy being around people. It's very, like, congregative, if that's a word. So neuroscience, for the most part, is very similar, especially the social aspects of neuroscience. So let's say I'm working in a lab, for example. Yes, okay. I'm working in a lab. It's great. When you're working in a lab, you're all scientists. There's no men, there's no women. You're all together working for the same goal. So in that sense, it's very equal. However, I did notice that there are more women dropping out later on. Usually, it's in relation to dealing with families. STEM majors tend to be very all-encompassing. You need to devote your life to this goal. If you're working on a thesis, you need to devote all of your time to that thesis. And if you're a woman and you want to, like, I don't know, have a kid, start a family, you might not be able to balance both of those things effectively. So I noticed, for example, in my lab, we had a woman who was older, a PhD student. She actually had to leave in order to pursue her dream of getting married, having a family. So right now, relationships, family, all that stuff is second, and I have to put my research first. But not everyone's going to be willing to do that. But that's just my experience.
And you're saying, I guess, that a guy would not have that decision to make.
Oh, absolutely not, because it's a very like kind of stereotypical thing that women have to be with the family, they have to be taking care of the kids, and men don't really face that stigma. They can be in the lab all day and like leave their kids at home, and they won't have to worry about that sort of stuff. While women do. It's socially ingrained, but it's something that you do need to worry about, especially if you go on to have kids.
Well, Nathalia, Sara, do you want to add?
So I would say a couple of things. First, I would say that perhaps because of the way I was raised and perhaps because of who I am by nature, it never occurred to me that any of the experiences that I encountered were gender biased. So it's looking back at things and thinking, well, could that have been? And maybe it was. So I would say there are very few specific examples that I encountered throughout my career where I felt like someone treated me in a certain way or access to things were limited because of my gender. Biology is very women heavy. So in fact, medical schools at this point are often 60% women. Certainly undergraduate classes are predominantly women, you know, more like 55, 60% women. I think she made a really great point that decreases as you go up the ladder. Again, less prominent in biology as an issue than in physics. But it does happen. And so for me, I was very rarely aware of a case where my gender limited my abilities. I had a physics teacher who said, oh, he never gave women A's. I had this PhD advisor in retrospect who may have engaged with us differently, but it never occurred to me as a limitation to me in any way. However, they do drop out as they get older, and some of that I think is a balance. So some of it is the reason that women tend to do well in research laboratories early on is that I have found in my laboratory, for example, the women are much better at time management. I think there is a difference in skill sets for an 18-year-old girl and an 18-year-old boy. The boys really struggle to figure out how they can come into my lab with enough time to really get everything done. And the women tend to do better with that. And I've talked with some of my colleagues, and that seems to be across the department an issue. In terms of having children and deciding to do that, yes, being a science teacher or being a scientist is all-encompassing. As an undergraduate student, I had all-day labs. I had 40 hours a week of classes, plus I worked in a research laboratory, and I worked in a lab all summer. But as a graduate student, I would say that many of the students that I worked with did come up with a good work-life balance. I think you just have to be aware of that, and I think you have to find a life partner who's supportive of that. So I met my husband in graduate school. We didn't have children at that point because he wouldn't let us have children until we had a house. So in fact, I had my first child just before I started my job here. I did my first job interview for a faculty position 3 days before I was due. And I had my second one 2 weeks after she was born. And I would say that the work-life balance worked because I do have an incredibly supportive husband who also has a flexible schedule and can get the kids if the kids are sick and I cannot. But I also had a mindset that it was just what you could do and that it could be a strength. So for example, when I was coming on my job interviews, I had to tell the people I was interviewing with, I have a newborn. I'm expressing breast milk, and you have to be okay with me saying that. And you have to provide me a room where 2 or 3 times a day, depending on how long the interview was, usually 1 to 2 days, where I can do that, it showed me how supportive the departments were. But then I came in and I gave a kick-ass talk. And I was sleep deprived, and I had a newborn, and I was juggling things, and look at how great I can be and manage all these things, and found everywhere I interviewed, they found that as a strength, not as a weakness. They found it as a demonstration of my organizational skills, my ability to manage things. And so I think that yes, you need to set up an environment which is supportive of you, having a family, more than just a life partner, but actually like parents and siblings and friends who understand that, you know what, I haven't been out to a movie, like, I don't know how long. But that's okay, because as you can see, we're all really excited about our science. And so I don't have to read books and I don't have to watch movies because I'm going to sit at home and surf the internet and look at gene expression. It's awesome, right?
Yes. That's totally fun.
So I think that as you get higher up, there are issues you have to consider and family support structures you need to think about, and those are things you can keep in mind now, you know. And I have been fortunate to have it all come together to get here to this place.
Sarah?
I think the answer to the question of whether women face difficulties in pursuing science fields depend on 2 things. One of them is even just, actually not just women, minorities in general. It depends, for example, on the amount of dedication you have for whatever field you choose. For example, I had the opportunity to hear Neil deGrasse Tyson give a talk at one of my seminar classes, and he was telling the story. You know, he is a racial minority in science, and he was a grad student at University of Texas, and he was kicked out of the graduate program. I don't know if you guys know, but so he had definitely a really rough patch before he got to where he is, and the way he explained how he overcame these difficulties was because he had this extra pocket of energy. He would keep pulling to the table whenever he was faced with these difficulties, and that pocket of energy came from his love since he was a kid for the field he chose. And so whenever anybody was, you know, trying to get him out of that field, he would think, I love this field so much and I've put so much work in it that I'm not going to let anybody else do it. So some people, you know, don't have as much of a passion for that. They might be a little more multidisciplinary. So that could be a little bit more difficult if you're not as focused on one thing necessarily. And the other thing it depends on is, of course, the field you pick. So, I mean, it seems like, you know, from what you both were saying, you didn't have as much of a difficulty. On the other hand, I had a lot of difficulty with sexism, for example. And I'm talking more about the physics. Astronomy is a very female-friendly field because the very first astronomers were females who were just doing bookkeeping, like cataloging stars, and the men were at the telescopes doing the hard mechanical stuff. So astronomy historically was born out of, you know, a group of women in a room cataloging stars. But physics, on the other hand, has always been a field that's been male-dominated. And especially at Hunter College, we have a really small physics department, and most of my classmates for 3 years have been, you know, 30-year-old males who, you know, have had other careers and decided that they wanted to pursue a career that was going to bump their salary or whatever interests they had. And I was one of 2 or 3 at all times, and I was younger than all of them. And I had to face, I always give this example. One time I was in this physics class and we had a new grad student grading the homeworks. And we all got back the homework and I really understood the topic, so I got 100. Some other people got 100 and some other people didn't. They got much lower grades than me. And I guess they saw my grade, and then when we got out of class, I heard them walking in front of me saying, oh, there must be something wrong with the grader. I mean, Sara got 100. And I was thinking, really? Like, do you think that this is why I get 100? You just can't accept that I'm a female and smarter than you. Just deal with it. But so stuff like that, I mean, it's true. Like, you are smarter. Like, don't let anybody put you down just because you're a female. I was just thinking that, and, I did, thankfully, I have my 3 advisors, research advisors in my group are female. And so whenever something like this would happen, I would immediately go to them and say, this happened. I don't know how to feel. Am I really, could this really be that this guy likes me or something? Or I don't know, I got lucky. And they would say, absolutely not. You're an amazing researcher. I've been knowing you, and, you have male peers in your group who recognize your competence. And I would also have this extra pocket of passion I would reach for. So it's definitely, and that's also part of why I moved to astronomy more than physics. I definitely feel like the pressure as in the physics field it attacks that pocket of energy I have. It doesn't seem like it's enough, and so I've turned towards astronomy more. But that's my experience with this.
Do you want to add?
Yeah, let me just add to that. All right, so let me just say to add on to what you were saying, Sara. In my experience, the hard sciences, they're not very friendly fields. Things like physics, even biology, or chemistry to some extent, even neuroscience. They don't really foster a sense of like companionship, or like they don't really advocate like teamwork. Instead, you're stuck being very competitive and trying to be better than the next guy because you have to get that grant, you have to get into med school. So people aren't generally going to be very friendly to each other. And that's something that I think needs to change if we want more people to come into either medicine or any hard science. To see it as an option, it has to be like friendly. People need to be open to talking about it. You can't just constantly try to put everyone else down. Because like, even though, as I said in my experiences, that hasn't happened to me, I've seen it happen to a lot of other people. And I've also seen people switch from being biology majors to something else like anthropology because it's hard. And people aren't going to be so open about it. That was exactly my next question. What needs to change? And I mean, what you just said, Shoshana, is really challenging the way that science is done. I mean, it is very much based on an individual getting grant money, and for that you need to be competing against your peers. Yeah, exactly.
And it's a highly scary social Darwinism that, Nathalia, I think you wanted to
I had one quick comment, which is just to say that I think, again, because of my upbringing, which is why I mentioned the details of it before, if that incident with the person in front of you having said something, if that had happened to me, it would never have occurred to me that it was a gender-related issue. I would have thought that it was because they thought I was stupid or because I was young. It never would have occurred to me that it was gender-based. And I don't know why I grew up with that mindset, but I did. And I think it may have helped me a lot. I also think that I just knew that there was no barrier. It was up to me. And I had that pocket of energy, and I had the people around me to say that. You know, my dad at 8 would be like, here's, you know, we had astronauts stay at our house. We had, well, cosmonauts actually, but, you know, and I didn't, professors weren't intimidating to me. They were just people. And that's something to keep in mind, right? Every one of your professors has a life experience. They either have a life partner, a wife, a daughter, a mother. They've had life struggles. They've seen how things get hard, and they've struggled through that. And you should reach out to your professors during classes, after classes, and and tell them the issues that you're struggling with in their class. And it's okay to tell them that there's this life situation going on, and it's not an excuse, it's just the situation, and they can help support you. And if you can find a professor that's a mentor to you, then they can also remind you, as they have for the other panelists, you can do this. And so seek out those people here, because we're professors and we've been there. So that would be the first piece.
Too. We're human too. Sara, one more minute, I guess, for your thoughts on what could change or what we could do. We could bottle your energy, but I don't know if you have the technology to do that.
Not yet, I don't think so. But I mean, for me, I actually think that the conversation needs to be involving men as well. I think there's a lot of focus in talking to women and creating these, these workshops for women who have imposter syndrome. If you guys know, imposter syndrome is when, a lot of women experience, for example, getting awarded something or receiving a grant or being recognized for their effort, and they feel like they don't deserve it. And there's a lot of these efforts put into informing women and talking about it with women on how to overcome these things. But because the gender gap is partly caused by a mentality that's within the male community, the conversation needs to be expanded, and men need to be involved in trying to change. It needs to be a collaborative effort. So I think I've seen this change, and I've seen it do a lot of positive impact, because what happens is that there is these upper senior faculty members who, some of them may have these preconceptions that come from male-dominated field. However many years ago they were instructed, and they pass it over to their male students, I guess, and it gets passed on. If these students instead get involved into these conversations, this can be stopped and the mentality can be changed. So,
thank you.
I would just say that the change also needs to come at a global societal level, right? If I can have this job and succeed because I have a husband who's okay with spending, we had our second child, he took 6 months off because I was pre-tenure. And his boss was okay with that, but society needs to be okay with that. And that's slowly creeping into places, but it's not as well as it perhaps could. And I think also as an American society, an appreciation of research and a funding of research and an understanding of where those funds go at a global, national science is valuable, funding science is valuable, basic research is valuable, is something that as a nation, we need to be better aware of, and as scientists try to promote that. And so some of these things that are being proposed here, I think, are really valuable.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Wow, I'm just really inspired by all of you, incredible scientists, speakers, and communicators. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your research with us. And now we're going to give you a chance to just process what you heard and think about what you learned from this. And at every table, there are 2 CERRU Dialogue Fellows.
Our question was regarding the statements about STEM not being open field. We were wondering if that statement was specifically referring to women or just in general as a field. And I guess as a follow-up, how you would see that changing, and do not see it as a necessary component of the field before we have a zillion people who all think that they can do everything in the world, when this field is a very hard field that needs some sort of rigidity in it.
You want to take a I'll take a shot at answering. So I think that the various STEM disciplines are very different in terms of the types of people that they attract. And here, just at Queens College, if you look at the demographics for students enrolled in bio versus students enrolled in computer science, you see dramatic differences. So it depends on the field. And the literature is struggling with, what causes that? Is it lack of access, or is it intrinsic preferences? Is it really the fact that women prefer to work with cute, furry little animals, whereas guys prefer to work with machines. I don't know. I mean, my gut tells me it's got to be, it's probably a mixture of both, but certainly as institutions, we want to decrease any barriers that prevent access. And you heard from the panelists about this. Does that help clarify?
I would like to just add one other thing, which is I think it depends on what level you say you want to take it to. So there are limits currently, especially because of funding restrictions, in terms of how many professors you can have who can be, quote, successful. But I would like to argue that, especially at the undergraduate level, yes, you have to have a certain level of dedication, and you have to be willing to sit in more hours of classes because you have a 3-hour lab that's worth 1 credit. But you know, the biggest factor you need to succeed in the STEM disciplines is discipline. You know, we have a lot more hours of class, and I don't know if we're supposed to have more hours of homework than the liberal arts fields, but that seems to be the way that it happens. And you know, I don't know, you know, but I would say that what you get at the end of a science undergraduate degree is an incredible skill set for problem solving, for working in groups, and things that make you really attractive in the workforce, whether it's in Wall Street or in a school or in the STEM discipline itself. So I don't think we need at the undergraduate level to be worrying about limiting the numbers. I think it would be amazing if this nation was full of undergraduates with STEM disciplines. As you get higher up, again, society needs to change if we're going to financially support basic research at higher levels.
In this group?
So I suppose my question was more along the lines of when women start entering, say, science fields, like we know psychology and biology were both actually extremely male-dominated for the longest time, but nowadays we notice that psychology is now considered a very soft science and far more females are entered into the field. So my question would be along the lines of, when women start to enter a field, why does it become known to or referred as a soft science? Like, it becomes slightly, I don't know, it becomes underrated, at least from what I've kind of noticed. It becomes less important, so.
Thanks. I'll take a crack at this. So I think the whole soft versus hard science thing has more to do with this empiricism. We all know that branches of psychology, one of the basic branches is behaviorism, which is really empirically sound. It's very supported by evidence, and there's a lot of data and a lot of fancy research going on. But the field as a whole has to do with the human mind, which is very kind of nebulous and hard to pin down. The same thing with something like sociology. Very nebulous, it's very kind of dealing with these abstract thoughts that we can't really put our finger on, as opposed to something like biology, chemistry, or neuroscience to some extent, where you can very easily pin down this receptor is doing that, this chemical is doing that. So I don't know if it has to do with women entering the field. The field might seem more friendly towards women because of those same kind of nebulous ideas and the fact that they don't need to be exactly right all the time. It's a lot. Those sciences are a lot more forgiving. But yeah, I don't think it has to do as much with the gender gap as much as it's what they're studying exactly. But I could be very wrong about this.
So I would like to add that these characterizations of sciences as being soft or hard are kind of weird and not based on evidence, dare I say, because of course if you talk to any sociologist who has respect for herself or himself, they will tell you that they've got an empirical approach that is grounded on decades of research. So I would, the first thing I would say is don't think of sciences as hard or soft, but that does not take away from the fact that 14% of computer science students are women at Queen's, and something like 60% of bio students are women. And that's kind of weird. I mean, we want to know why that is. And we want to know, I want to know as an administrator at this college, what can we do? Are we doing anything wrong to prevent women from being interested in this? You know, I'll give you an example. So rates of success in mathematics. Women are in the West do a lot worse in math than in other non-Western countries. So this is a cultural thing, it seems, according to some social psychologists who've done studies on this. We want to know what it is about Western culture that prevents women from getting excited about math and taking it on as a discipline.
I think I'm just going to get the rest of the questions, and then we can answer whoever would like to answer. So this group.
What is the role that family plays at choosing your career field?
So I think it very much depends. Oh, we're going to get all the questions? We're going to get all the questions. All right.
Yeah, just we're running out of time.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a biology major and a junior. So my question, so a lot of you guys talked about your childhood experiences and how it shapes your want to go into science. But as you might have noticed, like toys and like the kind of things, activities that young boys and young girls are encouraged to do are very, very different. Like girls play with Barbies and dollhouses, boys play with robots and cars. Like one of the reasons that I'm a scientist is because when I was young, my parents didn't do that to me and I got to play with dinosaur toys, right? So what can we do? If that's so prevalent in society, how can we change it? Or if it's not a fight worth, or if that's a little bit difficult, how can we maybe change our school systems to address those issues at a young age?
Great, so go for it.
So I think to address the issues of, there's one more?
I'm sorry, one more.
One more, all right, one more question.
So our table was really interested in the kind of discrepancy in two of the different stories. One was that she grew up in a household where she wasn't really aware of the gender differences in and when she grew up, she didn't realize that it was gender discrimination. In the other case, insults were perceived as being gender directed. And I was wondering why that might be, and if these conversations are encouraging women to believe that everything is directed towards gender, or are we just being overly sensitive on that topic? So, yeah.
Okay. So I'd say all really, really great questions. I think in the context of family can be hugely important, right? Family, in my case, gave me Legos to play with and told me that I could be whatever I wanted to be, and that nothing had to do, the gender was a non-issue, it never came up. So for me, and then now with my own family, having the support of my husband, the support of my mother has been instrumental in getting me to where I am. So I think I am not a medical doctor because my father said to me, you're going to hate medical school because they're not going to explain anything to you and you're going to be frustrated. You're going to want to do research because you will learn to understand things. And I think in terms of the issue of gender and awareness, it is a concern that I have as well, because now that it is such a topic, the last year and a half, I, for the first time, and questioning the role that gender plays in the choices that I'm making, which I think is fine. I make certain choices because I like community and I support team building, although that does impact my career future. Right, so I'm not a full professor, partly because I come and serve on these committees, and I do these kinds of things, right? But I do question that very much. So I'm sure you two also have thoughts on.
I actually wanted to address the question about the toys. I recently watched a TED Talk about a young engineer, a female, who was found herself in college, going through engineering classes and being extremely, she was doing really well. And then she finally started taking this design class, which was like, I think with CAD, the software CAD. And she had to start visualizing things in 3D, and she had a lot of trouble. She just couldn't understand why she was struggling with it so much. Turns out she did some research, and the fact that young girls don't play with construction toys puts them in a position that later in life they won't have the skills to be successful in these types of thinking. So it's really definitely important to spread the message about being careful with what kind of toys you give to your kids. And definitely I played with Legos, so I found myself having these skills that other young females didn't have, just because I had this opportunity of playing with gender neutral toys. So I think it's a very important point you brought up.
And on that note too, I also wonder, we were both in Europe as young children, and I don't know if there's some aspects of European culture that are more gender neutral than the American culture. I look at my kids and I look at the sexualization of young children, especially girls, and I wonder if we should be looking towards some other cultures where perhaps this is less prevalent, and again, try to fundamentally change the mindset of the community at large.
So, as you were saying, for example, even though I was born in Canada, I came to the US at a very young age. So I've been raised here, and as a kid, I played with Barbie dolls, Polly Pockets, that kind of stuff. So it really wasn't until middle and high school when I became really interested in the scientific fields. And I think, I was actually talking with this about to you during the interim. What we need to do in order to make children interested is we need to kind of spark some sort of a curiosity in them. Kids, especially in Western culture, they're raised to be very cynical. They're raised to not trust authority and to kind of not really listen to what adults tell them in school. I'm not sure how we can do that. It's definitely kind of like a hot button topic in education right now, is how to kind of make kids question not only authority, but the world around them in a way that will raise interest in the scientific fields. I know a lot of little kids get microscopes as a Christmas gift or something like that. And when they're teenagers, they don't get stuff like that anymore. Why is that? What's stopping teenagers from going out and buying a microscope? So that's the main driving factor in why I started a high school program, is I'm trying to get more kids interested in the world around them. I don't know if that answers your question at all. It's just something it's a big question that I'm trying to work through as well. Yeah.
Well, so take your kids to museums.
Oh God,
makes a big impact.
You might run into these two there.
Take them to the Museum of Natural History.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank everybody. Want to thank the panelists and Ava for moderating, and the Dialogue Fellows for leading the discussions, and everyone for joining the discussion. And join us next week, same location. We're going to be talking about another issue in education, the role of critical thinking. So tradition on the one hand, secular education, and questioning authority and tradition. So join us next week. Thanks again.
Turns out that Americans learn more about science from going to